Yeah, I think maybe I'll just get started now. So, welcome everybody to the Outdoor Recreation Council's June webinar. It's on forest, landscape planning, and recreation. My name is Louise Peterson. I'm joining you from our Revelstoke office. I would like to acknowledge with much gratitude and appreciation that the land on which I walk, live, and play is the traditional and unceded territories of the Silks, the Sinixt, the Secwepemc, and the Tonaha people. Just a little bit about the Outdoor Recreation Council. We are a charitable organization. We've been around since 1976. We have more than 70 organizational members spanning the entire spectrum of outdoor recreation user groups, from paddlers, hikers, mountain bikers, equestrians, climbers, snowmobilers, anglers, and many other nature interests. We give a collective voice to the interests and concerns of the organized recreation sector. When speaking to government, we advocate for access and support, including funding, and build capacity within the sector through resources, education, and webinars such as this one. We indirectly represent more than 100,000 British Columbians. And as always, I would like to extend an invitation to each and every one of you to be part of the Outdoor Recreation Council. As a member or donor, you provide direct support for important initiatives such as these webinars, but also for our advocacy efforts. And you should just head over to orcbc.ca afterwards to learn more about how you can join us in one way or another. As you can see, we are recording this webinar, and I'll make sure we share the recording with you along with some slides later this week. And yeah, you should see in the middle of your screen the presenter slide. So it's mine right now, but very soon it'll be Julie's in the middle of your screen, and there's also a Q&A box at the very bottom. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just use the Q&A box, and our presenters Julie and Barry will answer them after their presentations. So outdoor recreation is a very critical part of the lifestyle of British Columbians. According to a new Ipsos poll that the Outdoor Recreation Council, that's us, released last week, 7 out of every 10 British Columbians took part in at least one recreational activity in the past year. 80% of respondents also said that access to outdoor recreation amenities such as trails, recreation sites, campgrounds, day use areas, and access roads in their community, but also outside the community is important to them. Almost 80% of BC is public land outside of the provincial and national park systems, and recreation on these lands is very popular. The recreational resources that lie on these lands are one of the values managed under BC's Forest and Range Practices Act, FIRBA, which is under the responsibility of the Ministry of Forest. FIRBA and its regulations outline how forest and range practices or activities are to be conducted on public lands in BC during forest planning, road building, timber harvesting, reforestation, and livestock grazing, while ensuring the protection of resource values such as water quality, biodiversity, cultural heritage, and recreation. Recent amendments to FIRBA are part of the province's overall forest policy strategy to reshape BC's forest management framework to better serve the public interest in an era of change, by increasing Indigenous nations' participation in forestry, adapting to a changing climate, increase public transparency, and introducing what Julie and Barry will talk about today, the forest landscape planning framework. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to introduce you to Julie Castonguay and Barry Snowdon from the Office of the Chief Forester, which is within the Ministry of Forest. They'll tell us more about the new changes to FIRBA, how forest landscape planning and management practices will be addressing forest recreation values, and how recreation groups can provide input during the new FLP, forest landscape planning process. So just very quickly about our presenters. Julie is a professional forester with 33 years of experience in natural resource management here in BC. She's worked for the private and public sector, spanning a variety of disciplines, and she is now the manager of forest landscape planning at the Office of the Chief Forester. She's a passionate advocate for promoting ecosystem resilience, and encouraging creative solutions to natural resource management issues and supporting stewardship initiatives. She has her formal education includes a Bachelor in Science in Forestry from Laval University. Barry Snowdon gained his forestry degree from the Australian National University in, can I say, 84, and worked across the country within the forestry sector before moving to BC in 93. He joined the Ministry of Forest in 95 and spent his career working in areas of growth and yield, forest estate modeling, monitoring, and since 2019 forest landscape planning. He lives in Victoria with his wife and two university-aged children. I should say that Julie, I know, lives in Nelson, in case anybody is wondering. We also have a few staff from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy who are available to help answer questions during the question period. They might actually have some questions themselves too, we'll see, including John Hawkins, Executive Lead for Recreation Strategy and Service Transformation, Jennifer Pye, Recreation Resource Specialist with Rec Sites and Trails, and Jessica Ainsworth, the Provincial Recreation Manager with Rec Sites and Trails. So as you can see, we are in excellent company today. So Julie, I will hand this over. I'll hand the screen over to you, because I know you've got some slides that you want to share as well.
All right, so I'll start with sharing my monitor. Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting this event. It's always such a privilege to be able to reach out to so many of British Columbian to talk about what we've been spending a few years working on, the forest landscape planning. I know that you've heard about it. Hopefully you have heard about it. You may have already seen some presentation on it. And we're definitely, Barry and I are definitely happy to be here today. So everybody can see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we decided to maybe just hold on the questions. We'll go through the presentation. And again, as Louise mentioned, you can also type your questions as we go along in the chat if you don't want to forget them. And then we'll go from there. So, and a little bit of an outline. So we'll talk about the forest landscape planning framework overview, a little bit of an overview of it. Barry will talk about the FLP pilots and the new FLP projects that will be starting in the province. Also, he will discuss the FLP planning table structure, and then we'll discuss recreation involvement in the FLP. Of course, the FLP, you'll hear us say that is for the forest landscape planning, of course. Okay, so why forest landscape planning? So there's been lots of review of the current framework. The current framework is incorporating the forest stewardship plan. So right now, this framework has been implemented in the province for forest practices on Crown land since early to mid 2000, and it's been over 20 years. There's been definitely some changes that has been needed. First of all, reconciliation with Indigenous people, with the passing of DRIPA, and definitely having government-to-government land management decision more of a priority and a central place in the FLP process and framework. Landscape level issues, where we all know well the climate change impact, cumulative impact, timber supply challenges, and increased disturbance on the land. This is now quite a reality. Changing social values and expectation over time. Again, that framework was established. The current framework was established over 20 years ago, and a lot has changed since. And then also a combination of numerous stewardship initiatives and projects across the province. So there was definitely some changes that needed to happen. And the FERPA, the Forest Range and Practices Act, so FERPA, which discusses and manages the forest practices on Crown land. This FERPA initiative started in 2018 with a public outreach, and eventually came out to a Bill 23, which was introduced in legislation and received royal assent in November 2021. And then right now, the Bill 23 introduces the new framework, the Forest Landscape Planning Framework. And right now we're working on developing policy and regulation that support this framework. And we're expecting the FLP FOP, which is the Forest Operation Plan that is associated with the Forest Landscape Planning, but this regulation to come into force sometimes in 2024. So we're working on policy, guidance, and regulation to support the framework, the FLP framework. So what is the FLP? So definitely the key point and the huge change from the FSP to the FLP is working collaboratively with Indigenous partners. This is definitely central to the FLP, and you'll see it through the presentation. So the FLP seeks to develop direction to manage ecosystem health and resiliency, so very key as well, and support implementation of the old growth strategy, amongst many things. Also reflect local community values in forest management, and we'll explain how, and establish a short term, so the FLP is a 10-year plan, and provide direction to meet long-term vision for future forest conditions. It also clarify the where and how harvesting and other forest activity will occur on Crown land, and it provide also certainty for the forest sector. So the forest, some of the elements of the Forest Landscape Planning Framework. So it sets landscape and stand level expectation for the forest management and for the forestry sector. The plan is established by order, so it becomes a legal order by the chief forester. It can also be amended as local conditions change, if needed, within that 10-year span. The idea is that the FLP would apply to the volume-based tenure, or like the TFL, the TSA, or area-based tenure like the TFL, and also CFAs, small CFAs, anybody that has an FSP basically, or a combination of these licenses. It develops in partnership with Indigenous Nation, as we mentioned, super key and central to the framework, with engagement from licensees and input from stakeholders and local communities. And we'll loop back, and Barry will also discuss what's been happening in the pilots in terms of input from stakeholders and local communities. There is a legal requirement to report to the public every 5 years on the performance of the plan. So this is also very central, important loop back, monitoring and adaptation loop to make sure that we're doing what we said we're going to do. So key to this and central again to this framework, the framework is based on 5 objectives that needs to be considered when preparing a FLP. So the first one is not in any order of importance. They all have to be balanced and reflected through the outcome and plan and the management strategy that is developed under the FLP. So first of all is managing the values based on forest ecosystem by Indigenous people. Managing the values placed on ecosystem by local communities. Supporting the protection and conservation of the environment. Supporting production and supply of timber in the forest landscape area. And then lastly, preventing, mitigating, and adapting to impact caused by significant disturbances to forest and forest health. So thinking of resiliency, how to manage for an increased resiliency on the landscape level, at the landscape level. So what are the phases associated with the timelines of the FLP? So we are learning as fast as the pilots are being implementing the FLP framework. We know that there is going to be, and there is, a FLP pre-planning phase that may last approximately a year. And in that phase, we explore and scope interest from local communities, from stakeholders, but essential to that, we also engage with First Nation and Indigenous nations, and also develop work plan, term of reference, and also come up with some Indigenous consultation cooperation processes and agreement. So at the beginning, we need to identify which First Nation is interested and how they want to be participating, and developing terms of reference with those First Nation, at the same time as exploring and scoping interests of various stakeholders and local communities. And then also within that scoping, we, in pre-planning phase, we also identified the FLP area. So after this phase, which could last about a year or so, or could be shorter in some other instances, we confirm the values that will be addressed through the FLP. And following that, once those, we know who's at the table, and also come up with the planning structure, and Barry will talk a little bit more of some example of the planning structures. Once that is established, then we can start developing the plan and identifying preferred management strategy for selected values, and then eventually draft a plan recommendation for establishment. Once that is completed, the plan gets established, the FLP through an FLP order, and then the plan gets implemented and monitored. It gets implemented through the FOP, the Forest Operation Plans, and then there is constant monitoring, and there's also, as I mentioned earlier, a legal requirement to report every 5 years on how the plan is performing. There's also, we'll touch on that as well, there's also public reviews, Indigenous nation engagement throughout the process. So this doesn't quite, this is a very high level scoping of the phases that the FLP goes through. And eventually a new AC determination will follow. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but for people that are aware or also know the current framework, which is the Forest Stewardship Plan Framework, FSP framework, on the left-hand side, and it's a 5-year, the plan is usually approved for a 5-year span. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, it's the FLP, the Forest Landscape Plan Framework. So, and it's established for a 10-year time frame. So these are the two, and what I'm going to walk you through very quickly here is some similarities and differences between the two frameworks. And these two frameworks will applied throughout, well, I'll talk more about it, but basically we'll have those two frameworks in the province right now. Once the FLP is established, the FSP will cease to exist. But in the meantime, for any particular area, one or the other will exist. So first of all, we have the Land Act at the top that provides strategic direction to both the Forest Stewardship Plan and also for to the Forest Landscape Plan. You probably heard about the FERPA values. We know that the FSP has to consider all those FERPA values, and there's also a resultant strategy that can be developed for these values, and also some practice requirements that needs to be followed for those values. What we hear from the pilot is that those values there's no new values really for that. It seems to be emerging from any of the pilots. Right now we have 4 pilots, and then those values are definitely most likely will be integrated and for most of the FLP, and also local communities and First Nation will also voice what they feel their values are as well. They could be a subset of the main values that we see here on the left-hand side. But at this point in time, we've heard that there's definitely a good match in what we are working with, the values we're working at the FLP pilot. And Barry can talk more about it later. So on the right-hand side, we have the FLP objectives, which we looked at. And then under this, we have outcomes. So the FLP must contain outcomes that support one or more of the 5 objectives. And then also may include planning guidelines that identify areas where cut block road should be located, and limits on cut block size and configuration, and requirements for forest practices, silviculture system, and stocking standards. So this is all how the forest practices will occur on the Crown land. And also there's that 5-year monitoring period. And under both, there is a new requirement. So on the left-hand side, under the forest stewardship plan, we have the forest operation map that shows approximate location and proposed cut block and roads, which will eventually come into effect, this new framework, sometimes within a year or so. We're working on the regulation right now, and this will be become a requirement from the licensee to do that. So a FOM. So the FOM exists under the FSP framework, and as opposed to the forest operation plan, which is the FOP, exists under the FLP framework. And basically, similarly, it specifies approximate location of cut block roads and must support the outcomes identified in the FLP. It has to align with the FLP. And then eventually the licensee gets their cutting permit and a road permit that are being issued by the decision maker, which is usually the district managers. So this is kind of a broad overview of those 2 frameworks that we will be working with over the next few years in BC. So this is transition between the existing framework, the FSP and the FLP. As I mentioned, there's a phase approach. So the FSP remains in place until the FOP, the Forest Operation Plans, is approved for a specific area. And during the transition from the FLP to the FSP framework, there will be no overlap geographically. So if there is an FLP established and a FOP approved for that specific area, the FSP will cease to exist at that moment. So the 2 frameworks cannot exist over the same geographic area at once. So that's very important. And I'm going to pass that to Barry now to talk about the pilots.
Okay, thanks very much, Julie. Since early 2020, we have had 4 forest landscape pilots sort of unfolding across the province. One on the North Island, it's TFL 37, working in partnership with the Numgis Nation. We have one on the Sunshine Coast TSA, one in the Quesnel TSA, and one in the Lakes TSA. We also, we've heard, last winter about the 8 new projects starting up. Partly, driven by the government's commitment to identify additional sort of old growth areas to set aside. But they're not shown on the map here today, just because the discussions with First Nation partners are still underway, and in some cases, the boundaries of that projects, are still in flux. Next slide, please. So, this slide, it pretty much shows kind of the sort of generic planning table structure that we have in the pilots, and it's also kind of useful for identifying where various First Nations stakeholders and so forth, including the recreation community, plug in to the into the planning process. So up top, we have a joint G2G leadership table. It could either be one table, or if the nations decide they want to work with us somewhat separately to sort of maintain their autonomy and identity, we accommodate that as well. But it's up there that we have sort of our discussions, with the nations around the values. That they want to see managed on the land base, and at least some of the nations that I work with, because I'm embedded in the lakes pilot. For them, water is very, very important to them. Fishing and their fishing rights is very important to them. They are very concerned about cultural plants and trees. Both for sort of medicinal, food, fuel, material and technological uses. They, also, have, sort of cultural sort of sensitivities, with regard to the land bases that we're trying to develop these plans for. Where some of those sort of cultural use indicators include their trails and fish camps, camping sites, their harvesting areas, I think, including, their fishing and trapping and hunting and gathering sites. Also their spiritual and sacred places, and also sort of cultural corridors and cultural survival areas. So that's just kind of a few of the sort of, and they're very, concerned about wildlife species on their traditional territories as well. Below the sort of joint G2G leadership tables, we have planning tables, which, and thanks Julie for highlighting that with the cursor, where we have both Indigenous, BC government, and industry reps at the table. And you might say sort of why industry reps at the table is because, they'll be implementing the plan, that's to be developed. So we kind of want them there, to ensure, that we can develop a plan that we actually, have a hope of being able to implement. But in various forms, all the pilots, they have so local, public, or stakeholder review and input groups. That's off to the left-hand side there on the graph, on the graphic. In the case of lakes, that sort of stakeholder review and input group, it's chaired by the local councillor from Burns Lake, Charlie Rensbury. It has representation from local NGOs, the local mountain biking club, which is sort of very strong in that area around Burns Lake, the local rod and gun club, the trappers, and some of the guide outfitters are sort of, and we engage with that sort of group sort of repeatedly throughout the planning process, trying to understand the values, that the local communities, and so local users are placing on the land base. We off to the other side of the planning table, you'll see the other Indigenous nations, and that's really a bookmark to us. It's for those Indigenous nations that don't wish to partner in the planning process. We still have a legal obligation to consult and engage with those nations. Below the planning table, because we kind of take a little bit of a divide and conquer sort of approach, is everyone's not an expert in everything. So we establish a number of technical working groups. We had one for wildlife, aquatics, in lakes. We have a group that's working on recreation. I will fully admit, it's very early days in that particular group. In the lakes project, I would say, really with regard to most of the the 4 pilots. It's kind of early days with thinking about the recreation outcomes that we want to see for those planning projects. But so essentially, we have sort of opportunities for sort of local recreation groups, to engage at sort of the the higher level, sort of feeding into the planning table, and also we have them the ability for recreation folk to sort of engage at sort of the more sort of, for want of a better word, sort of technical level, about what an outcome that might look like. Next slide, please. Just with regard to where sort of recreation groups could participate in the FLB phases, is really in the values identification, which is kind of that phase, which is that phase 2, because we have this sort of legal requirement, or the chief forester needs to turn his or her mind to the values that both First Nations and local communities place on the forest ecosystems and the forest resources. So we try and solicit upfront what those values are, from those groups. Also, during the plan development is the other opportunity, for so local recreation groups and so forth to engage in the process at that technical level. And then sort of finally, just before we leave this slide, that after we do this sort of late in this values identification stage, and also prior to the plan being established, we have these 2 sort of broad public engagement points. So in the first opportunity, so we can engage more broadly with the general public about the values that they're interested in being managed on this land base. And then when we draft the plan, and prior to it going through the bureaucratic process of actually being legally established, we engage. The plan is to engage with the broad general public there as well. So there's another opportunity for rec groups to pass comment on the proposed plan. And next slide, please, Julie. So here we used, for part of that public engagement, this is from the Lakes project. We had a 2-month engagement opportunity that we ran on Gov Together BC, and that opportunity, it closed on May the 22nd. But if you go to the next slide, please, this is for the Quesnel planning process, and we have an engagement opportunity there that's still open. It's open until August the 8th, and there again, there's an opportunity, for folk to sort of let us know, what sort of values they place on the land base, and how they'd like to see them managed. Also, in context of the Quesnel pilot, they've had a number of, I think they had 3 open houses. It's to invite the public to come to, and they also have a stakeholder group. You can kind of think of like sort of like a focus group that the planning table engages with repeatedly through the process. Next slide, please. Yeah. So if you want some sort of more sort of information about the forest landscape planning process, you can go to our website here. You can just fire up Google and put in forest landscape plans, British Columbia, and you'll end up on this page. And next slide, which is sort of finally, we're not really here to sort of tell you how necessarily, how we think, what the recreation issues are. We would really like to hear from you folk this afternoon is some of, what the, recreation issues you'd like, for FLP to potentially address. So with that, if it's okay with Louise, happy to, Julie and I are happy to open the floor up to questions, or if John or Jessica or Jennifer have any comments they'd like to add or questions they'd like to ask,
Great, Barry and Julie. I was actually going to say exactly the same. That John might have some questions or something that he wanna share. So John, I can see you unmuted yourself.
Well, sorry, Louise. I was just going to say, well, thank you, Barry, and thank you for Julie. And I can see there's lots of questions, particularly around sort of, I think, what is a recreation value and how do values sort of fit into this? And I'm sure Barry and Julie have lots they can say about that. I do too. I guess the question for you, Louise, is there's already some questions in both in the chat and I think in the Q&A. I don't particularly have anything to add. Do we want to maybe tackle those questions, or you just let us know how you would like us to proceed?
Yeah. No, I think let's do that. We've got just trying to kind of figure out which one kind of came first, but like Sal from Bridge River has a couple of questions. I'm just trying to. So for phase 1, will there be committees formed for the scope area? That can probably be answered pretty quickly. And is this going to be similar to the old LRMP process? Maybe for you, Barry or Julie.
I would say, sort of, despite my age, I wasn't involved in the LRMP sort of planning processes. So I sort of wonder if he just wished to elaborate there.
So maybe that's pertaining to those committees. What are they going to look like? Julie, is that something you can answer? Maybe John?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Barry, I think maybe if that person can elaborate exactly what they mean by that questions, like are they thinking how to participate, or the structure, or like maybe elaborate on that, then we could maybe answer that with more focus.
And also, Sal, it is possible that maybe your questions were answered during the presentation. So maybe just let us know if you still have like an outstanding question. But Sal is definitely interested in knowing a little bit more. Like he is with a local government, and will local governments be included in any of the pilot projects? I'm sure they will, right, Julie and Barry?
Yeah. So yeah, sure. So I just noticed in the chat there, I had a little bit of back and forth with Josh Welsh, I believe, but I think it's Justin's comment regarding slide 6 is the kind of first new question I see there, which was with regard to slide 6, and it talks about engagement of licensees versus input from stakeholders and how these terms different with respect to attention and weight given to each interest. I would, we primarily sort of, I would say you sort of use the term engagement with reference to the nations. I mean, we do, like I said before, that in all of the pilot planning tables, licensees are present. They're not present when we have just G2G conversations, but at the sort of tripartite planning tables, licensees are there. They, to date, I would think, they, the licensees, at least the ones that I know of, apart really from sort of, I'm thinking of like Jeff Mycock, the Chief Forester of West Fraser, is always, advocating hard for forest resiliency. But, there hasn't really been, much, specific, pushback or anything from licensees around any, management proposal to date. We sort of solicit that input from the stakeholders, and we take that seriously. And at the end of the day, basically, there is a sort of a legal requirement, for the chief forester to at the moment it's a he, his mind, to that input, because it's input from the local communities. So I don't think it can just be sort of brushed off. He has to seriously sort of consider and weigh all that input and how it's addressed in the management plan. And then I think slide 8, there's a question there around the values inventory step, given how dated some of the provincial rec inventories are. I need to slide that. Such as recreation opportunity spectrum, what data sets will be used to provide input into the process. We recognize that as a as an issue, and that's kind of why and our recreational reps that are in the stakeholder review and input groups, that we're kind of really asking them to advocate for and sort of identify where their interests lie on the land base.
If I can just add to that, perhaps, Barry.
Yeah.
I think so. What we're working on with respect to that, great question, Justin, around how do we identify what the recreation values are? Well, there's a number of things, and I do agree with you. The recreation features inventory is certainly outdated, but the recreation opportunity spectrum, actually, we updated significantly in 2019 and have the capability to do that again quite quickly, given the power of algorithms and GIS now. But irrespective of that, I think that we can start with, first of all, what we clearly do have, which is a digital record of 2,300 recreation sites and trails, which capture a lot of the recreation value on the land base. It's not dissimilar to the process that's used in a timber supply analysis, where we start by looking at what are the designated features. So rec sites and trails are a place to start. And then certainly, through the engagement of recreation officers, through public and community engagements, and I think we saw that on a previous slide, that we assume happens in that sort of second stage, there's further opportunity for identification of the rec values or the features on the landscape. One of the sort of policy approaches that we're looking at right now within government on this process is to develop, I think, what's being loosely sort of referred to as maybe like a recreation chapter, where we would be outlining for planners what steps to take in terms of actually identifying what those recreation values would be, and to be forethinking a little bit, Justin. This may actually push us towards re-looking at the value of the RFI, although it's very outdated and it's going on 23 years old now, in its last iteration. There may be a need, and probably a little bit related to the work that I'm doing now around looking at what does a modern features inventory look like for going forward.
Sorry if I'm still on your job here.
I was just going to add that definitely the framework, the FLP framework, is definitely flexible enough to open, like when we look at the values, and definitely, as Barry and also John has alluded to, that we are looking for feedback from the communities and First Nation to tell us where are the values and what you see as a value. So, and then see how we can accommodate it, and how forest practices can address it as well.
I see there's a comment from Melissa around the is there a standard for how public engagement will be advertised during the development phase? It's our, as I showed with the lakes and the Quesnel, projects, we're using Gov Together BC, to sort of advertise some of those big sort of public engagement opportunities. I would say, you know, they are pilots and we're still learning how to do this, you know, and we're sort of all ears, you know, for any ideas you have with regard to sort of setting up sort of notification, you know, lists, you know, and so forth for rec groups to be, you know, to be identified, so you don't miss out. I think I'll leave the be well outside of my area of expertise with regard to Josh's question about unsanctioned trail building. And I'm wondering if, John, you might wish to comment on that.
Well, I think it's a little bit outside the scope of the discussion, except for one point, Barry, which is that, you know, we can talk about, you know, compliance and enforcement and challenges thereon and authorizations and so on. But I think maybe more relevant to this discussion is, you know, obviously recreation sites and trails has been talking for years about why sanctioned trail building is important, why authorizations are important. And this is a very good example of when we talk about, going back to Justin's question, about why it's important when we're identifying the recreation features, the trails and the sites, you know, those are the ones that are designated. And when they go through that designation process, that what we call establishment, you know, they've been through a referral process. We've worked with Indigenous communities, we've worked with licensees, they're recognized. And then there's a legal obligation to consider those in this FLP process. The challenge, of course, and has always been and always will be the challenge with unsanctioned trails is it's going to be very, very difficult for government, for us to account for those in the planning processes, recognizing that there are many trails that are unsanctioned that have been there historically, have high community value. And we're going to certainly try to make sure that those are considered and planned for in FLPs, but certainly, you know, there, you know, that's the risk of building an unsanctioned trail today, is that it's going to be very difficult if it's going to be able to be considered at all. So I think that's probably all we need to say about that one.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, oh, that's a question from Sharon from Backcountry Hosting of BC. She's asking, will the ORC be in the communication loop to know when, where, how these opportunities to contribute regarding recreation? And if so, will we be able to inform our members? So Barry and Julie, I think I have talked to you about that before. Like, definitely the ORC would like to be notified so that we can share this information with our members and anybody that cares about outdoor recreation through our newsletter and through our website. Yeah, that
would be great. I mean, we'd be happy to work with you, right? Because it just broadens the, you know, breadth of engagement and input that we get on these planning projects.
So let's see what else. Kristen is asking from ACBBC, sorry if this has been asked already, but how will stakeholders be identified? How is the public set to be involved? What format? And Barry, so for the pilots, like how are stakeholders, like, you know, with community-based recreation groups, how are they identified and notified?
Yeah, so I mean, with the pilots, basically we relied on the sort of you know, intelligence or local knowledge of the local districts, right? You know, to identify what the local recreation groups were. Because, you know, Julie and I, you know, at that provincial level, we don't know, right? So we really need them to tell us. And again, you know, that, and then they're, you know, either, you know, once they're identified, we reach out to them and see where they wish to participate in these stakeholder review and input groups. And you know, now with the cooperation of you there, you know, Louise, you know, we'll, you know, be able to notify them with regard to these broader public engagement opportunities.
Yeah, and then we've been working actively with various groups, Louise groups for sure, and all these groups definitely would be notified on new projects, and then we see their role as disseminating information and trying to reach out to who needs to be engaged or potentially could be engaged in some of the projects. So definitely would be a great way to communicate.
Just with regard to Carolyn's comment there, which is if a community says no to logging in our watershed for a whole variety of concerns, can a community really stop it? It is that if the objective is kind of permanent potential, protection of that watershed, that forest landscape planning is kind of not the vehicle to achieve that. That is sort of land use planning. The situations where the sort of grey area with regard to sort of forest landscape planning is if a watershed has had very high levels of disturbance and needs time to hydrologically recover. For example, we can put a pause, a temporary pause on logging in that watershed until it hydrologically recovers, right? But we don't have the the mandate to be able to permanently stop logging within this framework. That's you sort of need a land use planning process to achieve that.
Thanks. So if maybe just like because we do have questions in the chat and the Q&A box. So I'm just going back to the Q&A box.
I was looking at the chat. I was looking at the chat. So
I think we were looking in different places. Monty is asking. Oh no, he's actually because you asked a question, Barry. You were asking what sort of values do people here put on. Whatever your question was, now I kind of forget. But Monty's saying like one value is that he sees is he would like to see larger buffers needed for trails such as 30 meters. Multiple benefits could. Oh, sorry, actually that question's not completely clear, Monty. Monty, if you just want to kind of maybe elaborate on that. Sal would like to answer live. So Sal, I'm just going to unmute you. If I can do that. I'm just going to kind of find Sal here. Sorry, I can't see.
While you do that, I can definitely.
Yeah, while I do that.
There is one question that Sal, it's one of the first question there is for phase 1, which is pre-planning. Will there be committees formed for the scoping the area? And the scoping is will be done during the G2G with the Indigenous nation and the government to see how where exactly that FLP will land, and also with the local government, of course, the district level, trying to understand where is a contiguous area that we can pull together, where are the ecological processes, because it's a landscape level and we need to acknowledge those ecological processes at the landscape level. So basically looking at those of the current boundaries, the administration boundary that we have, is it a good boundary enough to implement an FLP, or is there some tweak that needs to happen? And if First Nations are also interested, we know that First Nation territory may also be considered, if at all possible. So there's different aspect, but it's usually done at the government to government level at the beginning of the process.
Okay, I have found the unmute button to Sal. So Sal, you can speak. You can ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just start. Thank you, Julie, for that answer, because you did mention local government, and I am a electoral area director. And Barry, just I got one question for you then.
Mm-hmm.
On the Sunshine Coast. Was it Sunshine Coast?
That's one of the pilots. Yes.
Yeah. Does that include the Sea to Sky area?
No. No, it doesn't. It's sort of like Powell River, Gibson's, and Seashell, right? It's that area. Right?
Okay, and was the local government reached out to then for that particular one?
To be to be honest, I'm not intimately involved in that
Okay,
that project, but I can find out and send a response to Louise, and she can distribute it if
Yep.
if that works for you. I would say with just Sal that with both in Lakes and Quesnel, we have, well, in Lakes, we have a local government who's running our stakeholder review and input, local government official or elected official who's running our stakeholder review and input group, and in Quesnel we have a staffer from the regional district who's involved in that project. Right?
yeah. Okay, that's really good, because one of the issues with these stakeholder groups, and we're just working through one with BC Hydro right now, is that it'll create divisiveness in the community, depending on who the chair is.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you give it to local government, then they're the ones that get beat up on, and not any community organization.
Yeah.
Just food for thought.
Yeah.
And for some of the people that are on that may not remember what the LRMP was the land and resource management plans. And many of them, including the one for the Lillooet area, was never adopted. So they went through all that work and they were never adopted. And then shortly after that, they went to the forest stewardship plans. And they were supposed to actually look at those plans, even though they were draft, and try to implement those into them. So I'm really glad to see what's happening. I learned quite a bit through the slides today, and I think it's going to be very positive. But the key is those stakeholder groups.
Yes.
And one more question on them. You're going to have these stakeholder groups. Are they ever going to be invited to the planning table? So the chair of the planning of the stakeholder groups.
Yeah, so I mean, we have had the chair of well, it's been sort of two-way communications. We have gone to the stakeholder review and input group, and we've had their chair come to the planning table. Right? No, I can just speak with reference to Lakes, which is the one that I'm intimately involved in.
Okay.
Julie, I just thought, I'm looking at a lot of the questions, and I think maybe one clarification that would sort of help to provide some context for many of the questions would be to discuss a little bit about sort of and I'm not sure if maybe we just went over it quickly at the very beginning, but to talk a little bit more about the difference between forest landscape planning, which is the outcome of that is to be very operational in terms of, at the end of the day, where does a cut block go and where does a new road development go for harvesting, versus land use planning or the government's efforts at modernized land use planning, which are a bit more of a collaborative, multi-value landscape level process, less operationally focused. Because I think a lot of the discussion is around sort of thinking about the public level of engagement in a broader land use plan versus sort of the technical aspects of planning forestry operations through this process. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so this is a good one, and it's definitely a lot of people ask that question. Was the difference between the LUP, the land use planning, and the forest landscape planning? So the land use planning is to provide strategic direction for the landscape, or it could be a small, it could be large, but for an issue, and it's multi-sectorial. It's not just for the forest sector. So the FLP is only for the providing direction, forest practices for the forest sector, whereas the LUP, the land use planning process of the modernized land use planning process, provides strategic direction to all the sectors that is within that geographic of that plan. So there's definitely differences. There is definitely, we call it kind of a gray area whereby, and I think Barry was alluding to the fact that we could potentially, the FLP could provide some temporarily, define some areas, potentially some old growth areas, whereby we can temporarily say this is set aside, or there is no harvesting for the next 5 or 10 years, or during the duration of that plan, while the LUP process, so the modernized land use planning process, come up with more strategic level planning processes. Both processes would involve, would partner with First Nations, and both processes would also involve the local communities level of stakeholders as well. But it's just a different level. So this, it's more of a strategic for multi sectors, and the FLP really specifically focusing on the forestry sector. That's definitely a huge difference.
Great,
So
thanks.
can I say, so I don't know how much time we have left, Julie and Barry and John, but we still have a lot of questions. And there's a very fine question here from Phil in Salmon. Will the assessment of community values like recreation be solely dependent on input from existing local leadership, or will the planning leadership also be expected to exercise research, analysis, expertise in assessing an area's potential, even if there is an identifiable local community leadership already active in an area?
So,
Julie?
I mean, I could trying to attempt that to answer this. At this point in time, we will definitely focus on the knowledge, the database that we have, the local knowledge that we have, and what's identified. Whether we will go and you know, come up with some more research or elaborated identification of potential new features. You know, I think it's up to the table. Like if the recreation value is very important at a table, I think there might be ways to address new areas or new values. But I think again, it's going to be at that main table whereby the group will decide, and it's a government to government decision as well to elaborate on how those values, recreation values, will be addressed. And then definitely if there is something very important, the local community will be able to voice their concern as well, or at least we will send some filters and engage the local community to basically explain what are the values and why it's important. And then from that, they will be considered. So there's many ways to maybe address not really new values, but new areas. And then definitely the decision will reside at the planning table and how that will be addressed. And also Barry was signaling to the fact that there could be a recreation working committee as well. If it's an important value within an area, they could also, you know, roll up their sleeve and really dig down and see what are the value, or if there's any new values that needs to be, new areas that needs to be addressed and additionally added to the FLP area. So, and I think the one thing to consider is the FLP, the forest landscape planning, has a pretty flexible structure. Definitely is based on engagement with local communities, and definitely participation is central from the indigenous nations. So this is definitely new from the forest stewardship plans. It's a big, we're entering into a new territory. Not that we haven't been there before, but it's definitely different. And that would just that provide a much broader understanding of what is important at that landscape level. So.
Mary's got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Julie was saying there, that, you know, thing to remember is that the forest landscape plans are, you know, for 10 years, and it's not just, you know, 10 years and then go extinct. It was, you know, 10 years and then to be sort of renewed, amended and renewed, with the ability to also amend before that 10-year term is up. So if you know, I would think in the very, you know, initial plans, the likelihood might be that we would sort of run with the best information we have available at the time of, you know, sort of writing the plan and identifying basically what the research needs are, you know, that can be worked on, you know, while the plan is being implemented, and then, you know, hopefully inform the development of the subsequent plan. So
So I think what is clear from this is that forest landscape planning is providing historic opportunities for communities, including recreation groups, to to have a voice in this process, but it is also placing a lot of an onus on these groups, which are often volunteer run, and they may not have a lot of capacity. So Monica from the Federation of Mountain Clubs is asking here, reviewing the slides as a reference to local communities and local recreation groups. However, recreation interests are often province-wide, and if notice is limited to local areas, then stakeholders with province-wide interest don't receive notice. It would be good to provide province-wide notification, similar to what now happens with respect to proposals for commercial tourism tenures, which is distributed to the ORC, which in turn distribute them to its members. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Go ahead, Barry.
I was just going to say that really it's kind of its involvement in those sort of stakeholder review and input groups, that the emphasis there is really kind of focused on, local groups. With regard to the, the broader, engagement, there's opportunity, when we have that sort of broad public, level, engagement with the public, for provincial groups to engage there. I mean, if we've got expertise that exist, at a sort of a provincial level, we would not be sort of adverse to, utilizing some of that sort of expertise at the technical level. But, we have, at least in the pilots, taken, the approach that all of the groups, whether they are NGOs, whether they are, recreation groups or whatever, that they kind of have a local flavor. That's the way we've sort of chosen to engage with them. In the pilots. That may evolve, as the program matures, but that's kind of what we've been doing to date. Julie, like anything you want to add?
No, that's excellent. Thank you very much.
And I would assume, Julie, that we'd be engaging with those provincial sort of level bodies, sort of during the policy development phases as well, right?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that they're definitely going to be, I think the government was pretty vocal, and well, I don't know, pretty vocal, but at least it was public knowledge that there was some new FLP that were starting. I'm sure they will be locally, there will be some, I mean, it's not a project that just happened over 2 weeks. It's a pretty long lasting process. It could last 2-3 years. At least. So definitely the first phase is about a year or so. So therefore, that's when we start scoping. People will start talking about it. I'm sure there will be at the local level, if people are engaged at the local level, you will definitely hear it as one way or another. And then definitely we'll reach out to the outdoor recreation council here for sure, and other association that we've been working with to make sure that they understand where the new FLPs are starting. So there will be 8 new FLPs starting within a year or so, and stay tuned. They're distributed across the province at this point in time.
That's excellent, Julie, because I think what the ORC can do is then we can notify our members, who again can kind of notify their members. So like the Federation of Mountain Clubs can notify the Caledonia Ramblers if it's in Prince George, and just like offer some support in case that's needed. So Monty has had quite a few questions here, so I'll just allow Monty to talk, and then we'll just check in to see if you've got any more time, Julie and Barry and John. Monty, do you have a question?
Thank you very much, panel, and thank you very much, Louise. My questions range from the minuscule to the broader side. I live in Powell River, and first off, I haven't heard that we were a pilot project. I'm wondering why that is. There was no public notification if it's been going on for a year or two. It's news to me. Any idea why that might be?
Or I would just, you know, the degree to which it's been, you know, published or advertised or whatever, sort of locally, you know, is sort of at the discretion of the district and the district staff, right? So, yeah, we haven't sort of controlled that from, you know, from the branch level.
Thank you. Second larger question, cumulative industrial impacts are not going to be addressed. For instance, if there's mining, you know, I'm thinking up north in the Fort St. John area where you have roads put in for fracking that go through forest lands and which open up that territory for recreation and animal travel and more humans going into forest spaces. I mean, are those not going to be, currently they're not taken into account? Is there not going to be any attempt at trying to bring that into account under the forest planning?
Yeah, just maybe I'll just start and then you can bring us home there, Julie, that I know, you know, courtesy of the, you know, the Blueberry, you know, decision in the Northeast that, you know, talked about cumulative impacts, you know, impacting, you know, sort of First Nations Section 35 rights and treaty rights, that now there's a process that's unfolded there where they do need, where the all the various dirt sectors are having to get together to sorry, something just flashed up on my screen and totally distracted me. You know, to sort of work through what the how to manage the cumulative impacts. I don't know whether you sort of more plugged into that than I am there, Julie, but I do know when I talked to Mark Van Tassel, you know, the DM from up there, he says that they are having to work together with oil and gas and mines, etc.
Yeah, I know that you know, we're definitely there's been a cumulative impact assessment protocol been developed for a few values. I think there's 5 values, mostly related to, I think it's a grizzly bear, moose, and others. I cannot right now think of them. I should, but so I know that these protocol has been developed province-wide, and we can use those. And if possible, if you know, if let's say one of the values wildlife grizzly, in some areas we may, if it's in dire strait or if there's some population management issue, we probably will use that protocol. And I would probably think that the table will use the best information as possible to see how forest management should be implemented moving forward in order to protect the value. So this definitely some of the protocol will be used. I cannot really speak any more specifically for any area at this point, but I know that they are in existence, and I know that the idea is to use them when they are available and if needed, really.
Julie, so this would be an example of where the broader land use planning, which we're not talking about today, we're looking at the multi-sectorial sort of impact and use of the land, would deal with those other sectors like mining, like oil and gas, versus this thing we're talking about today, which is focused solely on forest planning. So that's kind of the contrast there, and where the province is able to consider the cumulative impacts and again the multi-sectoral use of the land.
Yeah, so that's true. And then, you know, we wouldn't be able to turn around and provide any feedback to mining sector, but the only feedback we could provide is the forest sector, and then understanding, so is there something that needs to happen in forest practices if there is let's say a species at risk and dire strait, and then if we look at it, if we combine the cumulative effect of all the values, all the industry within an area, maybe that's where we have to go. I mean, that's basically what Blueberry has showed us. So the government knows that this is very important. So
sorry, John, were you just thinking about something you want to say? Nope. Okay. So there's a question here, or maybe more like a statement from David. This planning process is too complex for the general public, and if they're not understanding the values that are brought to the table, the ministry will never have public support. And then he goes on to say the timber licenses should be torn up, and planning based on the watershed case by case, taking into account health, resiliency, and timber and clean water. But does he have a point about the process being a little bit too complex?
Yeah.
Also for recreation groups to understand how we can feed in at the local level.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what. I mean, it is a complex because it's a complex. It is a complex. We're in a complex ecosystem. There's lots of things that are interrelated. So we have to have some sort of a complexity to the process. But what is changing is that there's definitely opening to understanding and hearing and incorporating the values of the local communities that are important, and that for First Nation as well. So I think this is a big change, and I mean that's definitely a foot in the right direction to incorporate that, and then attempt to address that. So I'd be interested to see where is the complexity, or what is it? Just like in general is complex, or there's segments that are too complex, or anyway, if there is anything that we can understand. I'm sure
we have
to understand what is
sorry, Barry.
Just
Barry, you got the question.
I actually have to go to another meeting.
Yeah, sorry. A little over time here. Julie, can you stay on for just like one more question?
Sure, Matt, one more question.
Okay,
My 2 o'clock appointment got canceled, so that's why I'm still here. I would have had left
lucky
15
for
minutes
us.
ago.
Oh, okay. There's so many questions.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity to talk today, and for the thoughtful questions that you've given us. So yeah, and look forward to speaking to you folk again. Bye.
All right, we look forward to bring you back on. So Justin has got one more question, and I think this will just be the last one, and it's a good one. Is recreation the same as tourism from the perspective of FLP planning? He did not see an acknowledgement of tourism industry values. How are existing tourism operations and areas with future tourism potential being considered in the FLP process?
Yeah, I think understanding what's happening in the pilots, tourism and recreation often are connected in many ways. So definitely the tourism part of the managing the forest for tourism and the recreation are linked. Maybe we didn't clarify that, but yes, we see that pretty much linked. There's also we understand we already have a level of visual quality that we need to manage for, that will also be integrated within the forest landscape planning. So the visual qualities is one of the values that will, I mean, we are assuming that it will remain. They actually, not to complicate things, but they're basically under a GAR order. So basically they are feed into the FLP process. But tourism is definitely key as well within the broader scope of recreation and tourism.
So what about areas that have high tourism or recreation potential, but that have not been developed yet?
Again, I think it's hard to, like, we can speculate, but if it's under development, there might be some consideration for the future. Again, it's a 10-year plan. So if there is anything that is in the plan, is it going to happen within that turn of the plan? Is also some amendment that can be done, like maybe the plan can earmark it, the table can earmark it and say, let's wait till it's fully completed. We can maybe amend the plan to interpret it. There's so many ways to address it. I think it really comes down to what needs to happen at the local level, what's important. And again, it's balancing all those values and trying to, we know that we can address everything all at once, but there may be some areas that we can focus on something, and other areas we can focus on other kind of a zoning approach.
And I'll just add to that.
this is again speculation. All of this will be discussed at the table, and at least there is local community involvement. There's definitely group involvement, First Nation involvement. So again, with having all, and this is definitely clear and loud and clear, is that right now the pilot tables have, you know, they all say it's hard work. It takes a lot of time. It's very time consuming, but the values right now in creating those relationships and creating the trust between all those relationships is key. And it's been one of the, you know, utmost value of the process right now during those FLP, in the FLP pilots. So this is what I keep hearing, is it's been a very positive experience so far. And then, you know, building the trust relationship in order to look at what we need to manage, and understanding that we cannot do everything all at once, but if we understand each other, understand the values and why they're important, let's try to do the best we can for that 10-year plan. And that's definitely a big change from the past.
Yeah. Well, we will, you know, I can show, so we've still got like 50% of people who joined us like an hour and a half ago. They're still here. So I can assure you all, or at least if you are like an ORC member, that we will be staying in close touch with Julie and Barry and John. and we are developing some resources that we are hoping will be useful to local recreation groups. But we do rely on a lot of information from your team, Julie. So I'm really sorry that we didn't get to all the questions. This is a lot of really good questions, but Julie has kind of said maybe that's an opportunity for her and Barry to come back at a future time and maybe go into a little bit more detail, take more. So we'll have to kind of allow more time for questions next time, right, Julie?
Yeah, totally. And then we can, if you send us the questions, we can attempt to answer as many questions as we can in writing, and then we can maybe forward that to you. I don't know if you could disseminate. I don't know if you have the email of the people. I don't know how that could happen, but we can cooperate and collaborate to doing that. And then really, I know that there's lots of excitement about the FLP. I know it's very transformational in the province, how we're going to be doing forest management in the province. And you know, it's exciting, and all I see right now, definitely coming from the pilots who are more than halfway through the process, is just very positive reinforcement that it's a great process. It could be complex, perceived complex, but it definitely is. It's working at this point in time, and definitely very, very excited about it. And we'll be more than happy to come back and talk to the group at a time. And maybe if you want us to focus on something specific within the framework, maybe that's what I would say, is if we come back, maybe there is specific areas that we can focus on, or maybe looking at some of the questions, we could theme them and maybe address some of the theme moving forward. So that's the other thing that we can do. Just ideas.
Yeah, and I know that John has got, you know, a very keen interest in this too, so I'll make sure to chat to John about you know, topics for future sessions as well. So I think we should just kind of say thank you. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Barry, who left, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about upcoming webinars, and I will send out this recording and Julie's slides. Julie, you'll send me your slides, and I'll probably send out like a small survey as well, because we would love to hear more about like what else you want to hear and learn about. So thank you so much, Julie, for your time. Thanks, John, for joining as well. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, great. Bye-bye.